evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to have you here this evening for the opening session of the Archaeological Society for the Study of the Mary Rose Incorporated. It's a great honor for us to have Mrs. Margaret Rule on my left and Sir Eric Drake on my right as representatives from Britain. The reason we are here this evening is to launch the American effort to supplement the work being done in Britain to raise the Mary Rose, a British warship which sank in 1545 in just 50 or 60 feet of water off of Portsmouth, England. On that most unfortunate day, almost 700 people on the Mary Rose met their demise. Sadly, Henry VIII, the king at the time, was watching the entire proceedings. No one knows exactly why the Mary Rose sank, but the fact that she did represented a monumental disaster for England at that time. The Mary Rose organization started in Great Britain a number of years ago. Today, many of us who are simply fascinated by the opportunity to recreate history
The wreck of the Mary Rose, hidden beneath the waters of the Solent, is one of the oldest English battleships associated with one of the most extraordinary English kings. To raise what's left of the Mary Rose is an enormous challenge and an alarming responsibility. The Mary Rose Trust, formed in 1979, has part of our national heritage in its care. What has been discovered in the last 18 months? What progress has been made in plans to raise the hull this year? Chronicle first reported on the Mary Rose in 1971 and filmed at length in 1979 and 1980. Now we bring you right up to date on the greatest underwater excavation in this country. The diver descending from the surface finds the remains of a ship in a trench beneath the mud. The deck beams and the rudder are in position, but it's only half a ship that survives. An accurate artist's impression shows clear water round the wreck. It's very rarely like that. Everything is a struggle underwater. Nothing is straightforward. Even at the height of summer, 3 or 4 meters visibility is quite exceptional. At the beginning of the 1981 season, when the archaeologists uncovered the site after the winter, they worked in 0 visibility. Much of the work was technical. The grid had to be checked, extended, realigned, and repositioned. They were starting to explore new areas of the ship. There were worthwhile finds immediately. These dividers must have been used for chart navigation. Chests and boxes, 25 of them, stuffed with equipment and personal possessions, were one of the revelations of the season. This one was left alone for 4 years, until the archaeologists were sure how to tackle it, how to excavate it, how to record what it contained. The bones of a man emerging at last from the mud and silt. After study, all these bones will be laid to rest at a memorial service in Portsmouth. Equipment on board the Mary Rose included large spoked wheels like these. Some were stored in the bows, as if for remounting the great guns for use on shore. Others were found on the main deck in the stern, a strange place to keep them if they were not to be used in battle. These spoked wheels supported this massive wooden sled for a wrought iron banded gun. No one was sure that guns like these were ever worked on wheels. The wheels themselves are marked with a broad arrow, like War Department property today. A carpenter's tools were found, and a carpenter's sawhorse nearby. A powder shovel. Throughout the 1981 season, the diving day began at dawn. The Trust excavated and raised 5,997 registered artifacts during 1981 in 9,226 hours of diving. Time underwater was always precious.
I think every archaeological project has deadlines that it has to work to. You always end up having to excavate on the very last day some key point. It's just the way in which you work as an archaeologist. It's not the best way of working, obviously, but with money, with time, with having to work to specific excavation seasons, it's almost inevitable.
If we were to work much more slowly, our own habitation of that site would be destructive. We've already done 19,000 dives in 3 years. It stands to reason if we did 40,000 dives, inherently our occupation does a little bit more damage. When we first expose the timbers, they are immaculate. Within a year, we get microbiological degradation, and in 2 years, every little animal that can possibly swim in and live in it and on it is doing so. And so we're fighting against a natural degradation. So there's this time constraint of mechanical and biological degradation of the hull, which means if we are going to totally excavate the ship and recover it, it must be done, I believe, during 82.
How much of the hull is left? How solid is it? Some of the timbers are immaculate. Some of the degradation is obvious. The ship is the ultimate artifact. This timber stanchion, a pillar, supports the upper deck. The starboard side of the ship is below us. Between decks towards the bows. Here the hull has been emptied of silts and artifacts. The plan is to clear the hull completely and then to brace it, strop it, lift it. Towards the stern at the keel, the massive weight of the timbers makes clear what a task that is. Can it be done? Is there any precedent? Has anyone else in the world found and raised a ship in this condition?
There's nothing comparable, I think, in that we have an integral structure with no across-ships support bracing matter at all. You're lifting a great curved raft, and so the problem is how to brace that raft without putting any additional strain on her to withstand the stresses of being lifted from underneath. There's nothing quite like it. There's nothing you can say, right, that's the way they did it, that's how we're doing. We're having to evolve everything, and this means a lot of discussion, a lot of very amiable argument, but from that I'm sure will come the best solution.
Much of the archaeologist's time is spent surveying, studying, photographing the structure of the hull. These joints seem to have sprung when the ship hit the bottom as she sank. Lifting the hull is not the only problem. There are also problems in emptying it without destroying evidence. This fugitive stain is all that remains of a beautiful steel sword worn by an officer. How can you keep a record of such a fragment?
Well, we have to find underwater consolidants that we can use that will give these fragile things a substance that will preserve them in situ while we excavate all the surroundings and enable us to undercut them and lift them on a plinth in a container. I've tried silicone rubber. There must be some grades which will work underwater. Unfortunately, I haven't found it yet. I ended up with a viscous black fluid that tormented me for about 3 weeks and finally had to peel off like treacle and take it away. So we carry on experimenting. But I think underwater archaeology has to solve this problem, how to reinforce very fragile objects, because I'm certain that on some sites they're being lost.
This is a delicate problem. A man's foot still inside his shoe, with his bones on top of it. The aim is to extract the shoe as a complete unit and analyze its contents on shore. The long bones matter less, though the silts adhering to these will also be examined microscopically and analyzed. The Mary Rose is the first underwater site where archaeologists have tried to analyze the total environment of the ship. Seawater pollutes the evidence. If they can lift a chest like this without dismantling it, they have a better chance of sampling the contents. In this case, the nails holding the chest together have completely dissolved.
So far, we've only had 2 boxes that have actually been completely closed. Usually an end has fallen off or it's sort of broken open. But what we hope to do is to bring up the contents of the boxes that have broken open, just in a large number of plastic boxes. You have to take a lot down with you. And then when we get some that are in pristine condition with the ends on and all very tight, all the seams very tight, we hope we'll be able to put them straight into a box that's larger than them and bring them up for excavation ashore.
The problem about undercutting a chest is that you never know just what's beside or underneath it. This is a tankard with an inscription on it, beside the bones of a small pet dog. They may have belonged to the same man who owned the chest. The inscription begins, Sit Deus Nobis. On deck, the remainder of the Latin tag was revealed, Sit Deus Nobiscum, quid contra nos. If God is with us, what can be against us? A gun captain's linstock, his badge of office, and an essential tool. It looks as if the man carved it himself. A lighted, slow match fits into the hole at the business end. You can still see the scorch marks on the carving. The gun captain keeps his distance as he touches off the powder. The excavation offers a total picture of life on board that ship.
This rather nice front of a jerkin came from the body of an archer, and we have a very useful lady that comes in 2 or 3 afternoons a week, and she's working on this, trying to put back the original leather surface, and then we'll mount this on a display board. This piece here, which is a leather wrist guard for one of the archers, it's a leather equivalent of this one, which is the only non-leather wrist guard that we found. This has been conserved again to display standards. It has its bindings here to put it round the wrist, and it's got a rather nice stamped decoration of the coat of arms. This jerkin and this guard are about the last of the old PEG impregnation and freeze drying. The leather experts that we spoke to came to the conclusion that the PEG we were using wasn't actually doing anything beneficial to the leather. It was just lying in amongst the leather. So we've now changed over to this rather disgusting solution, which is a lanolin-based solution, and the leather now soaks in that. We're still using freeze drying because it gives you a much better surface finish. We're in the process of putting as much material through as possible. We try to produce some objects for display purposes. These leather shoes are an example. We're trying to do a representative selection of different types of leather shoes from the site, and these are two different types you can see. One's got a little rope tie, and the other one's more like a slipper, plain slipper. These arrows, we had some up last year. We've now got probably 5,000 arrows. Are the worst conservation problem we have to face. I thought at one point that the rope and the glass was going to be bad, but physically having to handle 5,000 of these arrows and working with something that every time you pick it up it's likely to break into another part is rather soul destroying. The freeze drying technique we're using with the polyethylene glycol wax, which is used in industry as a release agent, has the unfortunate effect of flaking off the adhesive binding that they use to fix the flight feathers on. So if we don't do something about that, we're losing vital information about the arrows. And unfortunately, in order to keep this fletching area on, we have to wrap each arrow individually with some sort of bandaging in this area to protect that. Now, to do that with 5,000 arrows is a lot of work.
These are common objects on the site. They're called kidney dagger handles because of their shape. The steel blade, like the steel warheads of the arrows, has disappeared completely. This plate belonged without any doubt to the commander of the Mary Rose, Sir George Carew. Several plates were found with his symbol and his initials marked on them. A boatswain's whistle, concreted with its chain, recognizably of the same pattern still in use in the Royal Navy. A compass mounted in gimbals in a case. The iron needle has gone, and there was no compass card. Otherwise, it's functional. The silts inside these chests preserve leather fragments and wooden objects of all sorts. They also preserve fabrics. One of the volunteers who helps with conservation at the Trust's headquarters is Pat Edge.
It's the silk that really has amazed me. It's so fine, and this particular piece is finer than the rest of it. It's almost like a silk tissue, and there's the salvage both sides, so that would be the width of the loom. Possibly has been patterned because it's got slightly thicker weaving in these two parts here. I'm hoping that this will really make a good hat. This is very similar to the one that would have been worn by Henry VIII. This is a beautiful velour. It's, as you can see, this particular piece here, I just cleaned it slightly to see what it was like. I've just got rid of the tar on it, which we had to put in some acetone, and put that in the ultrasonic to clean that off. This jerkin, again, now this is the only thing so far that has got a definite colour in it. It's been identified as madder dye, and it's had all these pieces of braid. This is the only piece that was in situ, but we have got several pieces of this that I've got to try and find out now where they go. You can see down here, They've been stitched on. A lot of this is the actual dirt from the owner, and it's almost a greasy substance where it's been worn such a long time without being cleaned. This is one of our prize pieces. It is a hand-knitted stocking, part of a hand-knitted stocking, possibly one that would have only come to the ankle, just over the foot. And I believe, I can't really tell just yet, but I think that is the actual end of it. So it's probably fitted like a spat, more or less, over the foot, you see. But it's been knitted on for or a round needle because there's no seam, and also there is the shaping where they've increased in the stitches. But it's a very, very good piece of knitting. It's beautifully proportioned. It's a wonderful feeling to think that no one's ever touched this, and it's so old, and you're touching it for the first time for over 400 years. It really gives you, it gives me a great feeling.
During 1981, as part of the archaeological program, divers excavated beneath the lower side of the ship. This is the outside of Henry VIII's favourite battleship. The diver is inside the ship, looking out through a gunport. Rope and rigging elements at the bottom of the trench have lain undisturbed since the instant the ship hit the seabed. A bronze pulley block, still in working order. The iron has corroded away. This rail, carved to resemble a rope, is at the front of the stone castle. Henry VIII would have hung onto it to pull himself up the companionway onto the quarterdeck to talk to his admiral. Also in the stern, this narrow sliding door led through a partition to an inner cabin. The door was about 14 inches wide when the Chronicle producer measured it. About 9 or 10 feet of panelling was exposed at this stage in the excavation. The camera is looking down on it, but if the ship were upright, it would be a vertical partition between the main and upper decks. You can see the distinctive texture of the silts which filled the ship when she sank. These silts have conserved her. This chest was one of the most important discoveries of the 1981 season. The object protruding from the silt in the center of the picture is the tip of a Tudor longbow. The longbow was the classic weapon of the medieval period. But almost nothing is known about how longbows of that period were made, how effective they were, what range they had, and still less about how they were used on Tudor ships. Every detail could be important. Everything is recorded with a blue ball video camera and by written notes. To find chests full of longbows, about 180 of them in all, was a triumph. It opened the doors of knowledge for archaeologists and for historians. Margaret Rule.
I think they're one of the best groups of finds in the whole of the ship. There's several groups of objects which are exciting, but probably the best is the archery equipment, because we've long known from inventories that these ships of Henry VIII carried longbows. Even little tiny Rue barges of about 20 tons had longbows in their inventory. Now, the argument has always been that these were for when the soldiers landed ashore. They went galloping up and down the country with their archers to the fore. I've suspected that some of them were ship's armament, and I think we're seeing that now in the Mary Rose. I believe we're going to see that they were used on the main deck and on the upper deck as armament. And it makes jolly good sense too, because if I had an archer firing 12 arrows a minute at me, I would be pretty heads down and pretty ineffective as a gunner on the other ship.
To find out more about the longbows, Margaret Rule recruited a study panel headed by 2 professors from Imperial College London. They assessed the bows, they examined them, and they began to carry out tests to see if the bows could be made to work again.
Well, I think that there's no question about it. These men who made these bows were real craftsmen. They knew their wood. The modern technology tells us that the sapwood is stronger in tension and the heartwood is stronger in compression. They hadn't the detailed technology to tell them, but by trial and error and craft skill handed on, they knew it. And if you look at the bow, you can see the compensation for odd irregularities in the grain.
The tests were based on the exercises for bows that bowmakers have always used. But attached to the tiller on which the bow is supported are the most sophisticated modern strain gauges and charting devices. Robert Hardy, the actor, assisted.
3 inches that was, going for 4.
He's an expert on archery and on longbows.
I don't like the look of the very tip of the upper limb. What's She's giving too much.
The first step is to work the bow up towards about 8 inches of tip deflection. Then it can be rested before being braced and taken to its maximum of about 18 inches tip deflection.
Just following the lower limb, which is good. 6. I'll take it there once and hope for the best.
It looks good. How's it feel?
Well, it's just I'm worried about that top end.
Looks remarkably supple there to me, but then I don't know how
It
to
just
do
needs
it.
over supple. I think at that end it's so annoying.
This particular bow was one of the biggest found. Its extra-large section suggested it was used for some special purpose.
Yep. If that's real, it's not so healthy.
Well, game for second.
Number 2, which
I know, which makes it a... See, compare it with the other end, which is dead right. She's going to snap there without a doubt.
The bow was not working evenly. It looked perfect, but it was not behaving perfectly.
I don't think there's anything one can do except press on. No, I think you've got to carry on. Yes.
Bow work. You know,
I second John, in fact.
Yes.
You got to
I
7.
don't think we can do anything else.
No.
I think we take it to 8.
Take it to 8.
You do it a couple of times.
Yeah.
We'll draw it
Draw it at 8.
at 8 and leave it till tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I think that's
Yes.
real. I
Yes.
think that's real.
I will.
Sure.
Something like this. Right.
Right. Going to 8 a couple of times.
Check. We'll ignore the comments from that point on.
Now, what was the reason?
Oh, degradation.
Yes.
Degradation.
Degradation.
So there was no alternative.
Well, we can make that into a smart-looking bow for you.
For museum specimen.
Yes,
it's
yeah.
possible.
Oh,
Oh, no.
That's,
Together for cartage, scarch tape, etc.
These are the ones that we excavated underwater, and this was the broken end of the box, so there was
Yes.
biological degradation
Yes.
within the box at this end, so it's not surprising, but it looks so good, doesn't
Looks
it,
so good.
externally?
And, do you know, frankly, there was no alternative.
No,
There
that's
was
right.
no alternative.
no.
How do you learn?
No, this will make a fine specimen.
The next day, they began again, with the help of a professional archer.
Better, isn't it?
After trouble with the horn nocks, they managed to work one of the bows up to its bracing height of 8 inches. A Tudor longbow was ready to be drawn.
I'm going to 26 when everybody's ready.
Yep.
26. 1, 2, 3.
20.8.
The arrows found on the Mary Rose were more than 30 inches long.
I'm going to 28.
Right. 23.9.
Kilograms, the draw weight of the bow.
Well, now this is, I mean, it felt...
Yeah, this is discussion. How did it look?
It,
John?
it felt good to me. John? John?
It looked good to me.
It looked good to me.
Do you have any funnies in the ear?
Not at all.
Going to 30
Can you
inches
pass me?
when everybody's ready, and 1, 2, 3, 30, out.
24.8.
Beautiful.
That looked nice.
No problem?
That looked very nice, didn't it?
Did.
Beautiful.
Hang on.
Who's fit for 36?
Any grumbles, John?
No, not at all.
No. Do you want to do another 30?
I'm all for experimental archaeology when one has the material so that that work is valid. And I think it's only valid because we have such a large number, because we can say how representative these samples are. And the bow, which has worked today, which is a real joy, the first Tudor longbow, I think, to be drawn for 450 years. We learned from that how that moves. Now we can go back to the mass of the material and see what that means. What does that represent? Was that standard issue longbow? And we can relate it to Professor Pratt's scientific appraisal, and the two things come together and one supports the other. So I think it's worth it. Our problem is that we have biological degradation, which is very difficult to evaluate, so of course one cracks. But as a museum object, the visitor will never know. I believe it's a valid experiment. I hope we can go on and continue this experiment, and that we shall be able to shoot some of these bows, not just one or two, but a representative sample, and really study how they could have been used on board that ship.
The range of skills involved in excavating the Mary Rose is extraordinarily large. The work has grown increasingly technical and demanding over the years. At the beginning of 1981, hydraulic chipping hammers and small air hammers were used to break the concretions between the iron guns and the wooden decks. That sort of work could be immensely damaging if it weren't carried out sympathetically and accurately. The Trust has recruited a team of professional divers to handle the heavy lifting and dismantling jobs which follow the archaeologist's surveys. They work in low visibility, in heavy tides, with seaweed and anchorage rubbish swirling round them. What is the challenge?
Basically, I think working in confined areas and dealing with objects that you have to take great care over, i.e. bronze guns, which, all right, the bronze is almost indestructible, but it's the carriages on which they're based. And I think it's all right putting 2 or 3 tons of lift on a bronze cannon, but putting a similar amount of load on a base is not quite as easy, and you've got to weigh up the pros and cons as to how much damage you're going to do to the actual base of the carriage, which is actually more archaeologically important than the cannon itself. Nothing else I've done in diving has presented so many problems, and it's nice to be able to sit down with a small team, work them out for yourselves, say what you're going to do, and then go ahead and do it, and hopefully see it become successful.
Chris Underwood is the leader of the dismantling team. Here he's using fully professional diving equipment, which allows an airspace around his mouth. He can talk to a colleague on the surface while he dives. The colleague can monitor his air supply. Chris can control a major lifting operation from the seabed, repositioning the ship and its crane as necessary during the dive. This sort of operation is like a dress rehearsal for lifting the hull later this year. It develops the skills that will be needed.
Okay, all stop.
All stop.
All stop. Sam. Swing the jib west.
Jib west, roger, stand by.
Jib west.
Yeah. That's that way.
Drop, surface.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
You can also lift the hook 3 feet.
Up on the hook 3 feet.
And west.
And west, stand by.
Roger.
When the Mary Rose was commissioned, some of the guns were hoisted on board in just this fashion.
Let it come easy, Annie. Nice and easy.
Men sweated and groaned at the halyards. The petty officers and the boatswains shouted orders. The problems were much the same.
Steady on that guy. Let it come real smooth. Nice and easy. Okay, take it in. Andy, is this the way you want it? Keep taking it in easy then.
This big bronze gun was mounted on its carriage in the dockyard. A continuous iron capstock fixes the gun semi-permanently to its carriage.
Keep taking it. Davy, fairly gentle down. Fairly easy. Watch in case anything falls off, mate. Nice and easy, down.
You could not demount this gun to take it on shore to fight a land battle.
Nice and easy.
That's been one of the significant discoveries of the excavation. That was the reason for lifting the gun and carriage together in this way.
Hold it, David. David! Put your brake on.
The trust raised 4 guns, or elements of guns, during a single day in November 1981. This is a wrought iron gun on a sled. The wheels have been detached. It seems the big bronze guns were for anti-ship use, while the wrought iron guns were anti-personnel weapons. They alternated along the main deck of the ship.
Get your feet under it and lean down.
The whole day's work went like clockwork, except when something very unexpected intervened. The salvage vessel is ballasted with hundreds of tons of water. It is usually very stable. But a long swell on a calm day, created by the passing of a ferryboat, caused a near catastrophe. The small iron gun breech almost crashed into the side of the ship. It was dumped rapidly back into the water to damp down the oscillations before it was too late. The Mary Rose carried 91 guns. About 30 were big ones, but some were recovered in the 19th century. By the end of that day, there were 4 different guns arrayed on deck. Margaret Rule, and everyone else, rejoiced in the grandeur of the objects and their beauty. Yet more important than the way they look is the technical and scientific insight which they impart. Lifting the guns is one thing. To lift the whole hull without breaking it is quite another. It weighs 500 tons. The structure of the Mary Rose is attractive, sturdy, intriguing. But it's not complete, not like the Swedish ship, the Vasa, an integral structure. Is it really worth trying to lift half a Tudor ship and put it on display in a purpose-built museum that will cost millions?
Here we have a situation almost unique where we have a complex of a hull, all the contents of it, a fascinating background story, the association with Henry VIII and so on. And I think that even though, as we know now, less than half the hull has survived, there is sufficient information within that hull to enable you to present that total story very much more effectively than if you hadn't got it. And again, as a museum man, I would say that it is very important that it's the real hull and not a mock-up, not a plastic replica. All right, it's a very expensive operation to recover it. I think if the costs had escalated any further than they have, I personally even would also begin to question it. I think as long as we can keep them within this present framework, I think it's justified because of the opportunity to present the whole story.
So now, would anyone else like to say anything before I ask the trustees their views on whether to go ahead with a lift? I think we all understand what's involved. It's either we go ahead with Colonel Wendell Lewis's proposal to raise the ship, or we don't. It's simple as that. I don't think we need a formal resolution.
Have an alternative, Chairman. By that I mean, do we still have the ability to backfill the site?
Yes.
And secondly, do we...
Yes, that is the only alternative, to backfill the site and call it a day, and concentrate really any display on the artifacts and forget about the ship. But I would remind you again that it is one of the objects, the main stated objects of the Trust, to recover the hull of the Mary Rose.
Is it worth spending $1 million plus recovering the Mary Rose? Are we spending this money wisely? Is this the right choice for the city of Portsmouth? And is it right, not from an archaeological point of view, but from the public's point of view? Because that is what we are doing. We're bringing the ship ashore. They're going to come and see the ship. It's their investment, it's their product, and it's the national heritage as I see it, which is why I came. Are we sure that this ship is worth recovering?
If you ask me as an archaeologist, is she worthwhile, I would say no. If you ask me as a museum interpreter of a site museum, and that is my background, I'd say you could make this one of the most stimulating maritime experiences. But you've got to go back and recognise that you're interpreting a wreck and life in the middle of the 16th century at sea. You haven't got a Vasa. And that's the difference.
I believe the importance of the hull, and in this context I'm with Margaret entirely, that it is an element in the total presentation of an aspect of Tudor history in its social and all other contexts.
I think the decision is that we will recover because we feel other people should have the joy of the discovery of this vessel and of all the objects found inside her. And that, perhaps you could say, is the only thing that makes the whole operation valid. If we've been doing this very expensive excavation just for our own information and our own pleasure, that would be totally wrong, really, quite immoral. To bring her ashore means that generations of people to come can rediscover that ship and reinterpret her for themselves. And that, I think, is the correct reason for recovering her.
Now, I really think we must take a decision. Would any trustee be against the proposal? May I take it that the decision is unanimous in that case to go ahead with the exception of 2 trustees who are abstaining?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I declare that the decision is taken. Thank you all very much. We're now going to have some lunch.
In the dockyard at Portsmouth, HMS Victory is preserved as a supreme example of the wooden fighting ships of the past. Just beside her, an empty dry dock awaits the Mary Rose, one of the earliest English battleships, built here in 1509. She will lie, cocooned in plastic, kept wet, while she is studied, while a conservation program is finalized, while the Mary Rose Ship Museum is built. Can it all be organized before next winter?
All the materials and the labor and the design work and so on, this has all been done. And now it's a question of really final negotiations of the contract and placing the orders and telling people to get a move on. One of the critical dates in this whole exercise is the middle of April. And on that occasion, we're hoping to put down the first major item of lift equipment, which will sit over the hull and will provide us with the ability to be able to transfer the hull into the cradle and then lock the two together and bring it through the surface. We believe that it's technically feasible. We think it can be done, and with the sort of help that we've had so far, I believe it will be done.
With help from the Royal Engineers, the underwater lifting platform was launched on schedule on the 31st of March. It was towed upstream to Marchwood, the Royal Engineers base, for completion. The platform's feet were welded and fitted into position on schedule. On board the salvage vessel, professional divers trained to work with the archaeologists began to prepare the site for the platform. But the platform was not installed on time in early April because of problems with the equipment. The whole of this summer's schedule has now had to be reconsidered. There is an immense amount of work still to be done, underwater and on the surface.
Door shut.
Understood, going down.